All right, welcome back everyone to the ETS Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Bethany Barbary, and joining me today is John Cavara, and we're excited to talk to you about shore excursions today. But first, I did want to share a couple Bible verses I found that I hope, are somewhat inspirational. I tried to find something with the sailing theme since we're talking about shore excursions today. So I started with James 3, chapter 3, verse 4. Look at the ships also, though they are so great and are driven by strong winds, are still directed by a very small rudder whenever the inclination of the pilot desires. And then in Hebrews chapter 10, verses 24 to 25, and let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. And definitely that's going to tie in with some of what John's going to talk about. So John, can you tell us a little bit about how ETS handles shore excursions?
Absolutely. No, this is a question that I get a lot when it comes to cruises. And the title of this episode is very explanatory to what we do here. It's not just another Cruiseline shore excursion. We get that question a lot. What's the main difference of booking between ETS and the Cruiseline directly? And this is really what it boils down to. It's not the whole picture, but this is really, I would say, 90% of the draw is going to be those excursions that we do differently. So what really hits it home is that these are excursions that are not accessible to people that are booking outside of ETS. I just want to, hit that point. You're not going to book on a Cruiseline direct and have this same kind of excursion.
And Celebrity doesn't offer faith-based shore excursions. Royal Caribbean doesn't. They may go to Ephesus, there in Kusadasi when the ship's in port, but they're not going to be talking necessarily about Paul and really going in depth and giving time for some of the things that we do. They do a very good job. You'll learn all about the ancient Roman and Greek times there, but, it's not going to have that same bent.
Sure. And I think, like you said, they do a great job with the excursions they offer, but with us, the whole purpose of our company is faith-based and, follow in the footsteps of the, of the figures in the Bible. And that's really where we come in to, provide these faith-based shore excursions. So the main difference, obviously, is going to be that very strong faith-based tie. It's not going to be a very general shore excursion. It's going to be very much tied to the areas that we're visiting. It's going to be very, biblical focused. And, one of the great things, too, is that these shore excursions, they offer private buses. And what we mean by private buses is you're not going to be paired with people that are doing random shore excursions. You're going to be on a dedicated ETS bus doing dedicated ETS excursions there. So that really makes a big difference and also another thing too is everybody on that bus is there for the same reason. You're not mixed with, some people are going to do one thing and others are going to do a faith-based excursion. Everybody there is has the sole purpose of seeing the same thing on that shore excursion. So you have a lot of like-minded people on that bus too. And also the tour guides. Tour guides, they do a great job. And another thing about doing shore excursions with ETS is, everybody that works with us, that's a frequent agent that works with us by now, they know that we have a very robust land operations system. We have the best guides, we have the best on-the-ground support, and we basically take the knowledge and the context that we have doing successful land tours for over 50 years now, and then we partner with those same operators to do these shore excursions. So
yeah, and a lot of times we're using the same guides that we would use on our longer land tours, and on average, most of these guys have worked 10 or more years in the industry. A lot of them times, we won't even talk to them or consider hiring them till they've got a few years experience for sure. And most of the guides we're using, they've gone through college level programs. They really understand the Bible and the history and what our clients are hoping to hear about there.
Absolutely. And so everybody that has done, let's say, maybe a Journeys of Paul land tour, and they just love the on the ground experience, you're going to get that same quality of a tour on a faith-based cruise. So it really doesn't drop off one or the other.
Well, except you have the added benefit of the cruise is your floating hotel,
Exactly.
which is my favorite thing to say. It's great because the cruise is just going to sail from each port. You don't have the longer bus rides going in between cities to see different things. So it's the land tour with the extra benefits of all the fun of a cruise. You still get all the onboard entertainment and the different dining, options, but no unpacking.
So I would say, honestly, it's the best of both worlds. You mix that excellent, land operations that we've done R&D on this stuff for 50 years now, so we know what works, and then just pairing the expertise that our land team has along with having the floating hotel, the cruise ship. I just think it's a package that you really can't beat. And you mentioned dining too. You'll catch me at the buffet. That's always a great time. All those meals on there included and everything. So yeah, it's a really great aspect of faith-based travel that maybe it might not be your first go-to. Maybe you might do like a land tour to begin with, and then when you come back and then you want to experience something a little different, doing a cruise, or maybe you just out the gate do the cruise because it's such a great package. So yeah, those are going to be the main differences that we have. In addition to guest speakers, which we covered in a prior episode. But this is really what makes the so much of a difference between booking with the Cruiseline and ETS is those touches there. So we're going to go into a quick commercial break. Got to do some plugs here. And then when we come back on the other side, we're going to go over a little bit more about the guides and how
the actual experience you have during the shore excursion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Learn about the life and ministry of the Apostle Paul, the church's first martyrs, and the myth-infused archaic locations that influenced much of Western civilization on the 10-day Journeys of Paul in Turkey and Greece tour. You'll arrive in Izmir, classically known as Smyrna. Ruins from the ancient city's marketplace still stand today. After settling in, you'll travel north to Pergamum. Flexing its power to all those who turn their face towards it, the Acropolis stands 1,000 feet above the city below. Continue on to Hierapolis, known for its mineral springs and some of the best preserved Roman ruins in Asia Minor. View the acres of ruins in Laodicea where Christians of old were chastised by Jesus for being lukewarm. Then journey to Ephesus, where the Apostle Paul spent 3 years of his ministry and planted a church. In Athens, famed and iconic Grecian sites such as the Acropolis, the Parthenon, and the Erechtheum await your presence. Stand on Mars Hill, where Paul declared the universal presence of God. Tour the ruins of Corinth, where the Apostle Paul founded a church that would serve as his base of operations in Greece and Macedonia. Stand on the Bema, where the Apostle Paul resolutely defended his faith. Explore Philippi, where Lydia was converted, and visit the site memorializing this first Christian baptismal on European soil. Journey south to Thessaloniki and visit St. George's Basilica, built over the traditionally held synagogue where Paul once preached. Register now for the Journeys of Paul in Turkey and Greece, and gain a stronger understanding of Paul's life and ministry. You won't want to miss out on this life-changing experience.
All right, so we are now back from commercial break here, so thank you so much for sticking with us this long here. So as we alluded to before the break is you mentioned the experiences actually on the ground, what kind of makes these things flow. And, really, like you said, the guides really on any pilgrimage, any tour are going to make or break it. That's why we hand select perfect guides that, we've worked with on other various tours like land tours and stuff like that. So the guides, they do an excellent job, geographically going over where you're at, really painting the picture of the Bible for you and, giving you the biblical and heritage perspectives.
The guides just are tremendous. My very first trip with ETS, I was actually 16. I did a biblical cruise. We were going through Greece and Turkey following Paul's second and third missionary journeys. And, they really made it so fascinating. I'd read my Bible my whole life, but they were just spouting off these intricate little details and pointing out these little things, walking through the streets of Ephesus, and they're talking about what it was like in the time of Paul and Paul's influence that he had later. And, even about the heritage of Mary having gone and ended up in Turkey for a while when she went there with Peter. So, it's just absolutely fascinating and amazing, the detail, but they really make the experience. And our guides are wonderful too, because they, with shore excursions, you aren't having the same guide in each port. You're going to have a different guide, but each of the guides is going to make you feel welcome and like they're your best friend. And they do such a good job of helping promote the fellowship and then encouraging the different pastors and stuff that we have on the shore excursions to continue that element of fellowship and make the experiences special during the shore excursion. So do you want to share some of the different special kind of experiences we have when there's a pastor involved?
For sure. One thing that comes to mind, and hopefully the cruises will go back into to Israel here soon, but one of the most powerful aspects of any Holy Land tour, just go that route there, is, having the baptism by your pastor. That's going to be, probably 80%, 90% of the people that you talk to when they go on a tour like this with their pastor. That's going to be the biggest, one of the biggest, most powerful moments of that tour. And then also at the other various destinations that we visit, giving, a message at these places. That's, hearing it from your pastor at these specific places is going to just hit so much different than just hearing it from a guide. So one thing I know that you and I both hear about the guides is, a lot of times people that are on these trips, they stay in contact with these guides for years to come. So they end up being best friends. They'll WhatsApp each other, Facebook each other, and they just stay in contact so long. But so they just do an excellent job, but really leave like those unique experiences and those really like moving experiences, because it's going to be more intimate between a traveler and their pastor and their church, most likely, and
and it's really special when you're traveling with your church family, and especially if your pastor gets to go and you're all, reading Paul's words on Mars Hill where he said them to the Athenians, or, renewing vows and reading 1 Corinthians chapter 13 in Corinth, remembering Lydia's baptism there at Philippi and reading from the scripture, about it from the book of Acts. All of these things are just so special and meaningful when you get to do them in the actual places where they happen.
Absolutely, for sure. And of course, every Bible Land cruise obviously is going to have the key locations that you're going to visit. So many places of faith that, like we said in a prior episode about the cruise lines, how they do a great job of just having like these great itineraries that go to all these biblical ports. And then essentially what we're doing is just adding our touch to it with the excursions and all of that. So we have a lot of key locations that are visited on the Bible Land cruise. Do you kind of want to go through a couple of those? You are, of course, our destination expert. You know this better than anybody I've ever met, for sure. So do you mind sharing a couple of those ports there?
Yeah, I'll share some of my favorites. My favorite country to visit after going to the Holy Land is Turkey. Mm-hmm. So, when you're in the port of Kusadasi and going to Ephesus is absolutely amazing. They have a new virtual experience. So our guests for shore excursions this fall and next year, we added in that they can go to the new virtual museum. So they get to see like it replicated in 3D as Paul would have seen it while visiting, cool. Or as Peter would have seen it while visiting, or John. So, it's these little amazing things. Like we don't do the same shore excursion year after year. We try to keep them, updated with new things that are happening. And then, going into Istanbul, there is a lot of early church history, with Emperor Constantine living in Constantinople and becoming, the first Christian convert, creating essentially the Holy Roman Empire. There's so much early Christian heritage there, and it's just such an amazing city culturally too. Like the food's amazing, so you get that experience shopping in the Grand Bazaar or in the spice markets. Absolutely, you'll never forget it. So, you'll have the biblical moments, you have the amazing cultural moments, and then of course, anytime you're in Greece, like again, you're gonna love the food. is absolutely beautiful scenery, and just getting to be in places like Mars Hill or walking through the ancient marketplace area in Corinth and seeing the Bema where Paul spoke from. These things, if you can't make it to the Holy Land yet, you don't feel comfortable going, getting over to Greece and Turkey, walking in the footsteps of Paul is definitely one of my favorite things I've ever personally done. And then anytime we have a cruise going to Egypt, I grew up absolutely loving Indiana Jones. I was a nut. I'm still a movie nut. So the very first time I got to go to Egypt, it was amazing to see the pyramids. And, so on our cruises, we usually try to find itineraries, if we can, where they have 1 to 2 nights in the Alexandria area. So we'll do a day in Alexandria and then a day over to Cairo. And of course, they have the new amazing Grand Egyptian Museum that's opening. And that's just going to be phenomenal there by the pyramids. So
Absolutely.
For future shore excursions, when they're going to Cairo, we'll do a combination of the Grand Egyptian Museum and the pyramids most likely, because it's just not to be missed. So those are some of my favorites.
Absolutely. No, I'm a cat guy, and I know Istanbul is one thing too. There's so many cats.
I went one time and I was there doing hotel inspections for 2 days, checking them out, and it's just so funny because cats obviously are predators for rodents and other things. So all throughout Turkey, and especially in Istanbul, all the hotels will have little houses outside, like shelters for the cats and stuff, and they'll keep them fed and keep them there because they keep out all the rodents. So it's if you love cats, then go to Turkey.
Yeah, it's so cute.
They're everywhere.
For any fellow cat parents, definitely don't want to miss Istanbul for sure. There's just a lot there, a lot of cuteness overload. So of course, we have a ton of different Bible Land cruises that we offer. The Journeys of Paul, we have 10-night option, 11-night option. There's a ton of different itineraries. Obviously, we go by what the ships are doing. We can't, call them up and say, hey, we need to visit somewhere else. No, we basically take what we can with the cruise lines, and we have a ton of different itineraries. We publish them all out there. We're happy to go over all the options with you of what those cruises look like. But you really can't go wrong with Bible Land cruising. It's definitely
it's the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
You get the same amazing guides and experience touring. And like I said, number one thing is you don't have to unpack and repack, and you get to enjoy all the wonderful amenities of a cruise ship.
Gotcha. So if you had one itinerary that you think would be your favorite, mine for me is the passages of the Bible. What would you say yours would be? Yeah,
the passages of the Bible, because of going to Egypt, is great. I'm a sucker because that was my very first trip with ETS ever. Doing the Journeys of Paul as closely to the second and third missionary journeys as you can, which in 2026, we've got 10 and 11 night options on the Celebrity Infinity that are visiting Kusadasi, and they're going to Athens and Corinth, and then also going up to Philippi and Thessaloniki. So of all the itineraries we have for 2026, those are definitely the closest to following, the Book of Acts and the Journeys of Paul. And then there's options on some of them to do either a pre or post tour in Rome, so you can see where Paul's ministry ended, as well as learn about the early Christian heritage of Rome, in 2 or 3 days on a pre or post tour. So those would probably be my recommendation for next year for sure.
Awesome. Well, definitely appreciate your expertise and, talking our viewers and listeners through a lot of those different places and the different itineraries and all of that. And we're always here to go over more differences with you. We're happy to, set up a call to go over, what's the difference between this and that cruise and all of that. So we definitely hope you enjoyed this episode today, talking a little bit about cruising and excursions and all of that. I think it's a question that we definitely get a lot. So we would definitely, this deserved its own episode for sure, I would say. But we definitely appreciate your viewership and listening to us. Without you guys, this isn't possible. Let us know how we're doing, please. As we always say, your feedback means a lot. I got a call. Somebody said, your podcast is awesome. And, it's just great to hear those words. And, it definitely means a lot to us to keep providing this for you here. But without further ado, hope you all have a blessed one whenever you're listening to this. May the Lord keep you blessed and safe. And until the next time, we'll see you on the next episode.
All right. See you next time.